After 15 years of chasing hackers, human traffickers, and digital extortionists for the FBI Cyber Division, I desperately needed a change of scenery. The constant exposure to the darkest corners of humanity had begun to wear on me. I purchased a modest two-story colonial in Meadowbrook Estates, a quiet suburban development with tree-lined streets and manicured lawns that promised the peace I craved. Moving day arrived on a perfect spring morning. The neighborhood buzzed with weekend activity as the moving truck pulled up to my new driveway. Neighbors paused their yard work to watch with curious eyes as my belongings made their way into the house. An older man from across the street approached with a basket of muffins and introduced himself as Gerald. "Welcome to Meadowbrook," he said with genuine warmth. "You picked a good neighborhood, quiet, safe, good schools if you have kids." I thanked him and explained I was single, no kids, just looking for somewhere peaceful to decompress from my high-stress job. I deliberately kept my profession vague, mentioning only that I worked in digital security. The less people knew about my FBI connection, the better. Throughout my career, I learned that anonymity was often the best policy. The first week passed in a blur of unpacking and settling in. I converted the spare bedroom into a home office where I could handle the occasional remote work assignment. My superiors had approved a 6-month reduced caseload, a necessary respite after the dark web trafficking ring we had dismantled last winter. That case had nearly broken me. It was during my morning jog on day 10 that I first noticed him, a boy of about 12, carefully navigating the sidewalk with a white cane in one hand and what appeared to be a specialized tablet in the other. He moved with practiced confidence, occasionally stopping to run his fingers over the device's surface. My professional curiosity piqued at the technology he was using. Our paths crossed again later that week as I was bringing in groceries. The boy was passing my driveway, his device emitting occasional quiet beeps that seemed to help guide him. I offered a friendly hello. "Good afternoon," he responded, turning in my direction with a bright smile. "You must be the new neighbor at 427. I am Ethan." I was impressed by his spatial awareness and introduced myself. We chatted briefly about the neighborhood before his mother joined us, introducing herself as Sarah. She explained that Ethan had been blind since birth but was incredibly tech-savvy and independent. "That tablet he uses is pretty fascinating," I commented. Sarah smiled with obvious pride. "It is a specialized Braille tablet. Ethan is something of a technological prodigy despite his blindness. The device reads text, translates it to Braille patterns he can feel, and even helps with navigation." Over the following weeks, I often stopped to chat with Ethan and Sarah during my evening walks. Ethan enthusiastically explained his tablet's functions, and I found myself genuinely impressed by both the technology and his mastery of it. His face lit up when I shared basic cybersecurity concepts with him, his fingers flying across the Braille interface as he absorbed new information. It was during one of these conversations that I first heard mention of the homeowner association. Sarah rolled her eyes slightly when Gerald passed by and mentioned the upcoming monthly meeting. "Are you part of the HOA?" I asked once Gerald was out of earshot. "Unfortunately, yes. Everyone here is automatically enrolled," Sarah sighed. "The president, Victoria Lancaster, runs it like her personal fiefdom. The fines and rules are excessive, but the property values are worth it. Just be prepared for some scrutiny." Gerald had overheard and turned back. "Victoria inspected the Johnson property yesterday and fined them for having their garbage cans visible from the street. $200. I raised my eyebrows but said nothing. Every paradise had its serpent, it seemed. The FBI had taught me to observe before engaging, and something told me this Victoria warranted careful observation. Little did I know just how quickly our paths would collide. The community center gleamed under fluorescent lights as residents filtered in for the monthly HOA meeting. I arrived early, choosing a seat near the back where I could observe without drawing attention. Years of surveillance had taught me the value of peripheral positioning. At precisely 7:00 p.m., the room fell silent as a woman strode purposefully to the podium. Victoria Lancaster commanded attention without effort, designer pantsuit, perfectly highlighted bob, and an expression that seemed permanently set to disapproval. She tapped the microphone once and began without preamble. "Thank you all for attending. We have several violations to address before moving to new business." What followed was less a community meeting and more a public tribunal. Victoria methodically displayed photographs of various homes on the projector screen, detailing their infractions with clinical precision. The Petersons at 512 Maple have installed unapproved solar lighting along their garden path. She clicked to a photo that showed tasteful, small solar lamps. The architectural committee did not approve this lighting style. Fine of $150 and removal within 7 days. The middle-aged couple in the third row slumped visibly. Victoria continued without acknowledging their reaction, moving through a dozen similar violations. No infraction was too minor: faded mailbox paint, a basketball hoop visible from the street, holiday decorations left up 3 days past the allowed period. I watched the residents' faces, noting the mixture of resignation and resentment. Victoria wielded her authority like a scalpel, precise and cutting. My training in behavioral analysis flagged the classic markers of a power-driven personality: the subtle satisfaction in her expression when announcing penalties, the dismissive hand gesture when a homeowner attempted to explain circumstances. The meeting shifted to new business, and a young father raised his hand, asking permission to install a small ramp at his front entrance for his elderly mother's accessibility. Victoria's expression tightened imperceptibly. "All exterior modifications must go through proper channels, Mr. Chen. The aesthetic uniformity of our community is what maintains our property values." "But it is just a temporary wooden ramp," Mr. Chen persisted. "My mother is visiting for 3 months and cannot navigate the stairs." Victoria smiled without warmth. "Submit the proper paperwork, including materials specifications and dimensions. The committee meets next month to review requests." That would be halfway through his mother's visit, I calculated. The unfairness was deliberate, a message about who controlled the neighborhood. The moment that truly revealed Victoria's character came when a resident began taking notes on a tablet. Victoria paused mid-sentence, her gaze locking onto the device. "We prefer analog note-taking in our meetings, Mrs. Grayson. These screens are disrupting our community values. Studies show they damage attention spans and social cohesion." Mrs. Grayson hurriedly put the tablet away, apologizing unnecessarily. I noted Victoria's particular disdain for technology, information that would prove relevant later. As the meeting concluded, residents filed out quickly, as if eager to escape Victoria's scrutiny. I lingered, observing her brief interactions with board members, all deferential to her authority. Outside in the parking lot, I spotted Ethan and Sarah waiting near the building entrance. Sarah checked her watch repeatedly, appearing anxious. "The Accessibility Committee was supposed to meet after the main meeting," she explained when she noticed me. "We submitted a request for Braille signage at the community pool and playground." Victoria emerged, surrounded by several board members. Her gaze fell on Ethan and his Braille tablet, and her entire demeanor shifted. Her posture stiffened, her smile tightened into something that no longer resembled a smile at all. "Mrs. Mitchell," Victoria addressed Sarah without looking at her, "we reviewed your request. The committee feels that special accommodations for one resident are not a prudent use of HOA funds." Sarah stepped forward, voice firm but respectful. "The Americans with Disabilities Act suggests." "This is private property," Victoria interrupted. "We are not bound by the same requirements as public facilities." Her eyes narrowed at Ethan's tablet as he ran his fingers across its surface, the device emitting occasional soft beeps. "What exactly is that device? It seems rather disruptive." "It is a Braille reader and navigation aid," Sarah explained. "It helps Ethan read and move independently." Victoria made a noncommittal sound. "It looks very unusual. We have noise regulations in common areas." She walked away without further acknowledgement, but the look of suspicion she cast at the device stayed with me. The encounter lasted less than a minute, but it revealed everything. Victoria had not seen a disabled child using adaptive technology. She had seen an anomaly that did not fit her vision of perfect suburban uniformity. And in my experience, people like Victoria did not tolerate anomalies for long. The first violation notice appeared on Sarah's door 3 days after the HOA meeting. I happened to be returning from my morning run when I saw Sarah standing on her porch, staring at the official-looking paper with a mixture of disbelief and resignation. "Everything okay?" I asked, slowing my pace. She handed me the notice without a word. The violation cited unapproved technological equipment emitting sounds in common areas, clearly referring to Ethan's Braille tablet. The fine was $200. "This is ridiculous," I said, handing the paper back. "The device makes barely audible sounds, and it is essential for Ethan's independence." Sarah sighed. "It is just the beginning. Victoria has a pattern. Once she focuses on someone, the violations multiply." Her prediction proved accurate. Within 2 weeks, 3 more notices appeared, one for unauthorized modification to front walkway, a textured strip Sarah had installed to help Ethan navigate to the door, another for excessive time spent in common areas without active recreation. Ethan often sat at the park bench reading on his tablet, and a third for unauthorized electronic device use in the community pool area. I began documenting each notice, my investigative instincts kicking in. The violations were technically within HOA guidelines, but selectively enforced and increasingly targeted at Ethan's disability accommodations. Sarah appealed the fines through proper channels, but her appeals languished without response. My frustration grew as I watched their situation deteriorate, but I maintained my cover, offering only neighborly support while gathering information. One evening, I invited Sarah and Ethan over for dinner. As Sarah helped me in the kitchen, Ethan explored my living room, his fingers expertly navigating his tablet interface. "This device is remarkable," I commented, genuinely impressed. "Would you mind explaining more about how it works?" Sarah's expression brightened. Technical discussions about Ethan's adaptive technology were clearly a welcome change from defending its existence. "It is a refresher Braille 40, she explained. "The surface creates tactile Braille patterns that change based on the content Ethan is reading. It connects to various applications that translate visual information into formats he can process. The navigation features use a combination of GPS, Bluetooth beacons, and spatial mapping to help him build mental models of his surroundings." Ethan called from the living room, "It also helps me code. I am learning Python right now." I raised my eyebrows, impressed. "Coding without visual input, that is advanced." "The tablet creates tactile representations of code structures," Sarah explained. "Ethan has an extraordinary spatial memory that compensates for his lack of sight." The technology was not just assistive, it was transformative, turning a disability into a different way of experiencing and creating in the digital world. For someone like me who had spent a career in cybersecurity, the implications were fascinating. Meanwhile, Victoria's campaign intensified beyond official channels. At the community pool, I overheard her speaking to a group of mothers, her voice deliberately carrying. "I have concerns about that strange device the Mitchell boy carries. Has anyone actually verified what it does? In this day and age, with technology capturing all sorts of data." She let the implication hang in the air. The damage was immediate and visible. Families began keeping their distance from Ethan at the playground. Neighbors who had previously been friendly crossed the street to avoid interaction. The isolation strategy was working. The confrontation that marked a turning point occurred on a sunny Saturday at the community garden. Sarah and Ethan were planting herbs in their assigned plot when Victoria appeared, clipboard in hand, 2 board members trailing behind her. "Mrs. Mitchell, several residents have expressed concerns about the electronic device your son brings into common areas." Sarah straightened, soil still clinging to her gardening gloves. "His Braille tablet, it is essential adaptive technology." Victoria's skepticism was palpable. "Is he really so dependent on it? I notice he can navigate quite well with just his cane." Her tone suggested Ethan's disability was somehow exaggerated. Ethan's hands tightened around his tablet. I stood at my own garden plot nearby, close enough to hear everything while pretending to focus on my tomato plants. With respect, Ms. Lancaster, you are not qualified to assess the needs of a visually impaired person, Sarah responded, her voice tight with controlled anger. I am simply suggesting that perhaps the device is excessive, particularly one that makes noise and potentially records in common areas where other children are present. The implication was both clear and reprehensible. My hand involuntarily crushed the seedling I was holding. Are you suggesting my son's medical device is something inappropriate? Sarah's voice shook slightly. I am suggesting that unknown technology that beeps and potentially records data should be properly vetted before being allowed in spaces where children gather, Victoria responded coldly. Ethan's face had drained of color. Mom, can we go home? He whispered, clutching his tablet protectively against his chest. As they gathered their gardening tools to leave, I caught Sarah's eye and gave her a reassuring nod. My professional detachment was evaporating rapidly. Victoria had crossed a line, and my decision was made. This was no longer a situation I could merely observe. The community park basked in late afternoon sunlight, unusually empty for a Sunday except for a few scattered families. I had established a habit of reading on a bench near the playground, partially to decompress from work, but increasingly to keep a protective eye on Ethan, who often spent time there with his tablet while his mother ran errands at the nearby shopping center. Ethan sat alone on his favorite bench beneath a large oak tree, fingers moving deftly across his Braille tablet. I watched from a distance as he navigated through what appeared to be an educational program, his face expressing concentration and occasional delight when the device provided feedback. His independence in this moment, a blind child seamlessly interacting with technology that enabled his connection to the world, struck me as both beautiful and vulnerable. The peaceful scene shattered when Victoria appeared on the path, her purposeful stride and rigid posture immediately triggering my professional alarm signals. 2 HOA board members flanked her, creating an impression of official authority. I closed my book but remained seated, watching intently as they approached Ethan. Young man, Victoria addressed him with artificial sweetness that did not reach her eyes. What exactly are you doing with that device? Ethan turned his face toward her voice, his expression shifting from surprise to caution. Just reading, Ms. Lancaster. It is a history lesson about the American Revolution. Victoria stepped closer, invading his personal space. May I see this device? There have been complaints about unauthorized electronic equipment in the common areas. It is my Braille tablet, Ethan explained, his voice steady though his hands tightened protectively around the device. I need it to read and navigate. My mom has already explained this at the HOA meetings. Victoria's expression hardened. I find it concerning that a child your age has such an unusual device constantly in hand. What exactly is it capturing or recording while you sit here? The accusation hung in the air. Ethan's face registered confusion, then hurt, as he realized the implication. It does not record anything, he said quietly. It just helps me read and know where I am. I rose from my bench, moving slowly closer as Victoria's body language grew more aggressive. She leaned over Ethan, her shadow falling across him. Let me see it, she demanded, hand outstretched. I would rather not, Ethan replied, clutching the tablet closer. It is expensive and specially configured for me. Victoria's face flushed with anger at the perceived defiance. As HOA president, I have authority to inspect any suspicious equipment being used in our common spaces. I was halfway to them when I saw Sarah running across the park, her face a mask of concern. She must have returned from her errands to find Ethan confronted. What is happening here? Sarah demanded, placing herself between Victoria and her son. Victoria drew herself up. I am conducting an inspection of unauthorized electronic equipment. There have been concerns about potential recording devices in the children's area. This is absurd, Sarah responded, anger rising in her voice. "This is a medically necessary device for my visually impaired son. We have documented this with the HOA repeatedly." "So you claim," Victoria said coldly. "Yet no one has actually verified what this device does. For all we know, it could be capturing data, images, or worse." "It is a Braille reader," Sarah enunciated each word clearly, her patience visibly fraying. "Would you demand a hearing aid from a deaf resident, a wheelchair from someone with mobility issues?" The confrontation was escalating rapidly. Other parents in the park had stopped to watch, creating an audience that seemed to fuel Victoria's performance. Her face tightened with righteous indignation. "If it is merely an accessibility device, you should have no problem letting me examine it to reassure concerned parents," Victoria insisted, reaching toward Ethan again. "Please do not touch it," Ethan said, his voice rising with anxiety. "The settings are specialized." Victoria ignored him completely, speaking to Sarah instead. "Your refusal to cooperate raises serious concerns about what you are hiding." "I am not hiding anything," Sarah said through gritted teeth. "But that tablet cost over $5,000 and is calibrated specifically for Ethan's needs." Something dangerous flashed in Victoria's eyes, the look of someone who had found a vulnerability to exploit. $5,000 for that? Her voice dripped with calculated suspicion. "No accessibility device costs that much unless it has additional functionalities." I was close enough now to intervene but hesitated, assessing whether my involvement would escalate the situation further. That moment of professional calculation cost me the chance to prevent what happened next. With startling swiftness, Victoria reached out and snatched the tablet from Ethan's hands. "Mom," Ethan cried out, reaching blindly for his device. "Give that back immediately," Sarah demanded, her voice tight with fury. Victoria held the tablet away from them, examining it with exaggerated suspicion. "What are all these raised patterns, and these unusual ports?" "That is the Braille interface," Sarah explained, attempting to reclaim the device. "Please return it now." What happened next occurred with a shocking deliberateness that revealed premeditation. Victoria held the tablet up as if examining it in the sunlight, then with a decisive motion, released it. The specialized device crashed onto the concrete pathway. The sound of cracking plastic and electronics echoed across the suddenly silent park. Victoria brought her designer heel down on the screen, ensuring maximum damage. "We do not need drug dealer technology in our family neighborhood," she announced loudly to the gathering crowd, her voice trembling with manufactured conviction. "If this was truly just a reading device, I apologize for the misunderstanding, but better safe than sorry when it comes to our children's safety." Ethan had fallen to his knees, hands desperately searching the ground for the pieces of his shattered connection to the world. Tears streamed down his face. "My tablet," he whimpered. "Where is my tablet? Mom, I cannot find it." I reached them in 3 swift strides, kneeling beside Ethan while fixing Victoria with a steady gaze that had made hardened criminals confess. She took an involuntary step back, momentarily disarmed by the controlled intensity of my expression. "You have made a very serious mistake," I told her quietly, my voice carrying the weight of professional authority I had thus far kept hidden. I turned away from her to help Ethan gather the broken pieces, each fragment representing not just expensive technology but his independence, education, and connection to the world. Sarah knelt beside her son, arms around his shoulders as he sobbed. The park had gone completely silent, the watching families frozen in shock at the deliberate cruelty they had just witnessed. I looked back at Victoria, who was already composing herself, preparing justifications. She had no idea that she had just made the worst enemy possible, someone trained to dismantle criminal enterprises piece by methodical piece. And I had finally found a use for those skills that felt unquestionably just. The Mitchells' kitchen table became our war room that evening. Sarah made coffee while Ethan sat quietly, the broken pieces of his tablet gathered in a shoebox before him. His fingers occasionally traced the shattered edges, his face a portrait of loss that went beyond the physical device. I placed my FBI credentials on the table between us. Sarah's eyes widened as she read the identification. "You are with the FBI, Cybercrime Division." "Yes," I confirmed. "I have been on reduced caseload after a difficult operation, which is why I moved here. I wanted somewhere quiet." A bitter smile crossed my face. "So much for that plan." "Why are you showing us this now?" Sarah asked, her voice a mixture of confusion and cautious hope. "Because what happened today was not just an HOA dispute or a neighborhood disagreement. It was a deliberate act of discrimination and destruction of essential adaptive technology for a disabled minor." I kept my voice level and professional. "This is no longer a situation where I can simply be a supportive neighbor. Victoria Lancaster crossed several legal lines today." Ethan lifted his face toward my voice. "Can you really help us? The HOA agreement has all these clauses about mandatory arbitration and no lawsuits." His awareness of the legal obstacles impressed me. HOA agreements cannot override federal protections, particularly those involving disability discrimination. But more importantly, I lowered my voice slightly, I suspect Victoria's behavior today is part of a pattern that extends beyond HOA matters. I opened my laptop and began organizing a response strategy, explaining each element as I worked. First, we document everything, every violation notice, every interaction, every witness to today's events. Your tablet's destruction happened in a public place with multiple witnesses. That gives us leverage. Sarah nodded, already pulling out a folder containing every citation Victoria had issued them. Her organizational skills matched my own investigative methodologies. Second, we need evidence of pattern and practice. If Victoria has targeted other vulnerable residents, that strengthens the case against her. "The Chens," Ethan said immediately. "They wanted to build a ramp for his mother but were denied, and the Goldsteins had to fight for months to install a Cal alert system for Mr. Goldstein after his heart attack." I made notes, impressed by Ethan's awareness and recall. "Perfect. I will speak with them discreetly." "What about the tablet?" Sarah asked, glancing at the shoebox of broken components. "We cannot afford to replace it right now. The insurance has a 3-month processing time for adaptive technology claims." "Let me worry about that," I said. "I have colleagues in the digital evidence department who can help in the meantime." I made a quick call to Ramirez in the tech lab, carefully wording my request as a professional courtesy rather than an official case. His response was immediate and supportive. "Destruction of adaptive technology for a disabled kid. Send me the specs. I will have something configured by tomorrow afternoon." With that immediate concern addressed, I returned to strategic planning. We need to understand Victoria's motivation and potential vulnerabilities. This level of targeted harassment usually indicates something deeper. Sarah frowned. She has always been controlling, but this vendetta seems extreme even for her. "I suspect financial impropriety," I said. "HOAs control significant funds with limited oversight. The particular viciousness of her response to Ethan's technology suggests she feels threatened by scrutiny or documentation." Late into the night, I used my secure FBI access to research Victoria Lancaster's background. The picture that emerged confirmed my suspicions. Before becoming HOA president, she had worked as an office manager for a property management company that had been investigated for embezzlement. While never charged, she had left the position abruptly during the investigation. More tellingly, the HOA's financial reports showed concerning patterns: unusually high administrative fees, contracts consistently awarded to the same maintenance company despite higher bids, and a reserve fund that had diminished by 30% in the 2 years of Victoria's presidency. I created a secure digital folder containing all the evidence, careful to distinguish between information obtained through legitimate public channels and details I would need to reacquire through proper legal means if this became an official investigation. By morning, I had assembled a comprehensive strategy. Sarah reviewed it with the steady resolve of a parent fighting for their child's rights. Ethan listened attentively as I outlined each phase of our approach. This will not just be about getting justice for what happened to you, I explained to Ethan. It is about ensuring this cannot happen to anyone else in the community. Ethan nodded solemnly. Like you told me about cybersecurity, sometimes the best defense is making the system itself more robust. I smiled at his perfect application of our earlier conversations. Exactly. Victoria exploited weaknesses in the HOA governance. We are going to patch those vulnerabilities permanently. Sarah reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Thank you for doing this. We felt so powerless against her. That was her first mistake, I replied. Predators like Victoria target those they perceive as powerless. She never considered that you might have allies with specialized skills. As I gathered my materials to leave, Ethan asked quietly, "What happens next?" "Next," I said, "we prepare for the emergency HOA meeting Victoria will inevitably call. She will try to control the narrative about what happened, but this time we will be ready for her." The determination in both their faces reflected my own. Victoria had destroyed more than a tablet. She had shattered a child's sense of security and inclusion. My career had been dedicated to bringing justice to those who exploited vulnerability through technology. The tools and methods might differ in this suburban battlefield, but the fundamental mission remained the same. The emergency HOA meeting was scheduled just as I predicted. Victoria moved quickly, sending out notices claiming the gathering was to address concerns about unauthorized electronic devices and community safety. The community center was filled beyond capacity when I arrived, the atmosphere electric with tension and curiosity. I deliberately chose a seat in the back row again, this time not to observe unnoticed, but to maximize the impact of my planned entrance. Sarah and Ethan sat midway toward the front, a new Braille tablet, courtesy of my FBI tech department, in Ethan's hands. Several neighbors I had discreetly interviewed over the past days nodded in recognition as I entered. Victoria stood at the podium, immaculate in a navy business suit that projected authority. Two security guards from a private firm stood near the entrance, an unprecedented presence at an HOA meeting that revealed her anxiety about potential backlash. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," Victoria began, her voice steady and practiced. "Recent events have raised serious concerns about security and appropriate technology use in our common areas. As your HOA president, my primary responsibility is community safety." What followed was a masterclass in narrative manipulation. Without specifically naming Ethan or directly referencing the tablet destruction, Victoria painted a concerning picture of unvetted devices that could potentially capture data, record children without consent, or even be used for illicit communications. In my capacity as HOA president, I recently questioned such a device and requested to inspect it for community safety. The situation unfortunately escalated when the device was accidentally damaged during inspection. Murmurs rippled through the audience. Several people who had witnessed the deliberate smashing looked at each other in disbelief at this characterization. "The HOA board will cover reasonable replacement costs for standard accessibility equipment," Victoria continued magnanimously. "However, we will also be implementing new guidelines requiring registration and inspection of all electronic devices used in common areas." She was attempting to reframe her destruction of adaptive technology as a safety procedure, while simultaneously expanding her authority to monitor residents' devices. The calculated boldness was almost admirable from a tactical perspective. Victoria continued with a practiced expression of concern. "While I regret if my actions were perceived as insensitive, I stand by prioritizing the safety of all our children over the convenience of any single resident." The implication that Ethan's essential adaptive technology was merely a convenience sent a visible ripple of anger through Sarah's shoulders. Victoria noticed and smoothly pivoted. "I understand emotions are running high, but I ask that we maintain decorum and focus on community safety. Are there any questions before we vote on the new device registration proposal?" That was my cue. I stood and began walking toward the front of the room, each deliberate step echoing in the suddenly silent space. Victoria watched my approach with growing unease, clearly trying to place me beyond neighbor who keeps to himself. "Yes, I have several questions," I said, my voice carrying the calm authority developed through years of federal service. "Starting with your characterization of deliberately destroying a miner's federally protected adaptive technology as an accidental damage during inspection." I reached the front and turned to face the audience rather than Victoria, a subtle power move that displaced her as the central authority. For those who do not know me, I recently moved to Meadowbrook Estates seeking a quiet place to decompress from my work as a supervisory special agent with the FBI Cybercrime Division. I removed my credentials, letting them catch the light. Victoria's sharp intake of breath was audible in the silent room. "While I had hoped to keep my professional life separate from my role as your neighbor, recent events have made that impossible." I connected my laptop to the projector, bypassing Victoria's presentation. The screen displayed a systematic timeline of Victoria's targeted harassment against Ethan and his family, supported by documentation, witness statements, and relevant federal statutes regarding disability accommodations. The Americans with Disabilities Act and the Fair Housing Act both explicitly protect individuals with disabilities from discrimination in housing contexts, including HOA governance, I explained, advancing through slides that laid out Victoria's pattern of selective enforcement and escalating harassment. Victoria attempted to interrupt. "This is highly inappropriate. We have an agenda." I simply held up my hand and continued speaking. Additionally, my concern about potential financial improprieties within the HOA led me to review public financial records. The projector displayed a series of questionable transactions and accounting discrepancies. The consistent awarding of maintenance contracts to Piedmont Services, a company owned by your brother-in-law, without competitive bidding raises serious ethical and potentially legal concerns. Gasps and murmurs swept through the audience. Victoria's face had drained of color. "That is proprietary HOA information," she stammered. "You have no authority to." "HOA financial records are legally accessible to all members under state law," I corrected calmly. "Furthermore, the pattern of excessive administrative fees without corresponding services rendered warrants further investigation by appropriate authorities." I advanced to the final slide, a clear photograph taken from the park's security camera showing Victoria deliberately smashing Ethan's tablet under her heel. What happened in the park was not an accident. It was not about community safety. It was a deliberate act of discrimination against a disabled child, motivated by a pattern of abusing authority and fear of financial scrutiny. The room erupted in shocked conversations. Victoria gripped the podium, her composure finally cracking. "You cannot come in here and make these accusations. The HOA bylaws clearly state." "Federal law supersedes HOA bylaws," I stated firmly, "and federal law is very clear about discrimination against persons with disabilities." The meeting dissolved into controlled chaos as board members huddled in urgent consultation and homeowners voiced long-suppressed grievances. Through it all, I maintained my position at the front, watching as Victoria's carefully constructed authority collapsed around her. When she attempted one final defense, claiming she had only ever acted in the community's best interest, I simply played the audio recording of her calling Ethan's essential medical device drug dealer technology in front of multiple witnesses. Her own words accomplished what my presentation alone could not: complete and irreversible discreditation. As Victoria finally fell silent, I met Ethan's unseeing eyes across the room and nodded slightly. Justice was being served. 2 weeks after the confrontation, Victoria Lancaster submitted her resignation as HOA president. The letter, drafted by her attorney, included a carefully worded apology to the Mitchell family that stopped short of admitting deliberate wrongdoing but acknowledged serious errors in judgment. I watched from my front porch as she loaded the last of her belongings into a moving truck. Several neighbors stood in their driveways, making no effort to conceal their observation of her departure. Victoria avoided eye contact with everyone, her once commanding presence diminished to hurried movements and downcast eyes.